Welcome to the Explainer. We're going to get right to it today with a really tough question. How can just one single line from a sacred text be twisted to justify, well, a global war? We're going to look at the exact verse and the, let's call it a controversial tool that makes it all possible. And look, this isn't just some abstract academic question, right? This is happening. It's at the very heart of so many real-world conflicts. What we're really talking about is a battle over meaning. And the consequences, well, they're global. So yeah, let's dive in. So for certain extremist ideologues, it all comes down to this one idea, this concept they call the verse of the sword. It becomes their ultimate justification. It's like a theological master key that they believe unlocks a divine mandate for, you guessed it, perpetual war. Okay, so we're talking about a verse being weaponized. But to really get a handle on how it's being misused, we got to do two things. First, we need to look at the verse itself. And second, we need to understand the, let's say, theological tool they use to give it so much power over everything else. All right, here it is, the verse of the sword. The argument from extremist groups goes something like this. Because this verse was supposedly revealed late in the Prophet Muhammad's life, it cancels out everything else. I mean, we're talking about hundreds of other verses that call for peace, for patience, for forgiveness. They claim this one verse just wipes them off the board. So you're probably asking, how can they possibly make a claim that radical? Well, it all hinges on this really complex legal idea. It's called abrogation, or if you want the Arabic term, nask. Okay, so what is abrogation? At its core, it's a method for trying to resolve what looks like a contradiction in the text. You can think of it like a legal amendment, you know? A newer law comes along and replaces an older one. But, and this is so important, classical scholars had super strict rules for using it. It was always the absolute last resort, never the go-to tool. And just look at how rigorous this process is supposed to be. I mean, you can't just cherry-pick a verse you like and say, boom, this cancels everything else out. No way! There has to be a real conflict between two texts. You have to try everything to reconcile them first. And you have to know for sure which one came later. Extremist ideologies, they just kind of skip all these steps. This is what I find absolutely fascinating. Look at this timeline. Over 1,000 years, you see this clear trend. The deeper scholars dug into the text, the less they used abrogation. As their methods got more and more sophisticated, the number of verses they thought were canceled just plummeted, from over 100 all the way down to 5, and for some modern scholars, to 0. So you have this rich, evolving scholarly tradition, right? Now let's see how extremist ideologues just toss all of that out the window. They build their entire worldview on a really distorted, really rigid reading of this one concept. And this, right here, is the core of their thinking. But what's really interesting is they don't all see it the same way. Take Muhammad Faraj. For him, it's super simple. The verse of the sword just erases every single peace verse. War becomes a constant, divine duty, period. Then you have Syed Qutb, who's a bit more strategic. He says the peace verses aren't canceled, they're just provisional. You know, something to use when Muslims are weak. But when they're strong, it's time for war. And then there's Abdullah Azam. He uses the verse to slice the world into these 3 rigid categories. You're either a fighter, a subjugated non-Muslim, or an idolater that has to be fought. So you see? They've got different methods, but they're all driving toward the exact same goal, justifying endless war. Okay, so how does the mainstream scholarly world respond to this? How do they push back against this weaponized interpretation? Well, they basically say, hold on. Let's get back to the basics, to the foundational principles and the full context of the text. And they often start right here with this number, 113. What's that? It's the number of chapters in the Quran, out of 114, that start with the exact same words. In the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful. That's not an accident. That sets an overwhelming theme, a foundation of mercy and compassion. And here's the kicker. The one chapter that doesn't start with that phrase, it's Al-Tawbah, the exact same one that has the verse of the sword. This tells you something really important. It frames the entire chapter as an exception, not the rule. Mainstream scholars argue it's all about a very specific historical moment, a response to a broken treaty. It wasn't meant to be a timeless universal command for war. So this really gets to the heart of the scholarly rebuttal. They say, look, there are these core foundational verses about peace, tolerance, justice, and those are unequivocal. They're called muhkamat. You can't just abrogate them. They argue that grabbing one verse, yanking it out of its historical context, and ignoring the entire rest of the book, well, that's not interpretation, that's distortion. For them, the default setting in Islamic law is peace, full stop, not war. Which brings us to what I think is the most important takeaway from all this. This isn't just a simple disagreement. It's not just a matter of different opinions. What we're looking at are two completely, fundamentally different ways of reading a text. On one side, you have the extremist view. It offers this simple, brutal certainty. One verse cancels out hundreds of others. War is the command. Easy, simple. On the other side, you have the scholarly view, which embraces nuance and context. It insists you have to read the Quran as a whole, where peace is the default. Abrogation is this really delicate legal tool that you use with extreme caution, if you even use it at all. See the difference? One approach is designed to shut down all discussion. The other one invites it. And that really leaves us with this question, doesn't it? Whose interpretation holds the power? Because at the end of the day, texts don't speak for themselves, people speak for them. And understanding the difference between a rich, complex scholarly tradition and a rigid, selective ideology, that's not just some academic game. It's an absolutely vital tool for understanding and maybe even countering the justifications for violence we see all around us.